All right, we'll give it just a minute or two here before we get started. Welcome to the folks I see trickling in. Definitely feel free to throw your name and where you're from in the chat. We'll give people just another minute or two, and then I will dive right into things. All right. Give people one more minute, and then I'll kick it off. Okay, let's dive in here. Thank you guys. Excited to be sharing our Thursday here together. And we're going to get right into Beyond the Generic Review, turning resident stories into your most powerful sales tool. A quick introduction. I'm Eva. I sit on the marketing team here at Rent Grata and have helped companies of all different sizes scale their marketing programs. So that's definitely the lens through which, I kind of bring a lot of this content. But really wanted to spend some time kind of talking about the evolution of star reviews, where we go from here, and give you guys some really actionable strategies for how to turn these resident stories that you have and this amazing data that you're sitting on into your most powerful sales tool, what you can really use this month to start closing more leases. So we will get right into it. So what we'll cover, we'll kind of go over this star review crisis. We know they're an inevitable part of the process here when folks are looking for apartments and doing their hunting, but why they're really not enough to seal the deal in 2025 and sort of where we go from here. We'll talk a little bit about the trust erosion problem, why folks have lost trust in these traditional star reviews and sort of what we can do to mitigate that. We'll get into the science of story-driven sales, cover a little bit of the neuroscience behind why it's so important to lead with these stories, and how incorporating these stories into your leasing process is more important now than ever. We'll actually look at how to bring these stories in at every prospect step of the journey. I'll give you some practical ways to weave these stories into your leasing process and give you a June implementation plan. We'll cover sort of 4 big ways you can start right now in the last week or so of June here, highlighting these stories and really bringing that into your process to close these leases during peak season. So we'll start with this review crisis. We know this is such an important part of the process. We can't escape the fact that these reviews exist and that folks are looking at them. And we know that 80% of renters, particularly folks who are paying apartment premiums with rent of at least $17.50 per month or more, look at both the community's website and these online reviews. So we can't escape that fact. They're looking at these online reviews and using it as a part of their decision-making process. But a huge percentage of people also automatically assume some of these reviews are fake. We've lost some consumer trust in these reviews. I'm sure if you've spent any amount of time on Amazon, you understand why. We're a little bit more skeptical of these reviews than we once were. And 64% of people are unwilling to trust a review site solely featuring 5-star reviews. So really having an accurate picture, having both the positive and the negative and sort of a really good look at what it's like to live in these communities is super important here. But people are hesitant to trust these reviews. So what do we do about this? We can talk a little bit about why reviews have lost some of this credibility. And a lot of these reasons I'm sure you encounter in your day to day, communities who are offering rent credits for positive reviews, there's a bit of an incentive bias there. We're kind of asking folks with a reward to leave these reviews. Often there's some timing manipulation going on. We're only asking happy residents either right after move-in, or something I've been seeing more and more recently is communities asking for these reviews right after a tour. There's often some platform gaming going on. Businesses can hide negative reviews or actually eliminate negative reviews, and so consumers are curious, especially if a community doesn't have enough negative reviews, sort of what's going on there. Have they hidden something? Are they not being honest, about some of these reviews? And the rise of bot reviews. We see this across platforms, across different services. More and more, we're seeing automated fake reviews, or sort of suspicious looking reviews. And so folks, they're looking at these, but they don't carry the same credibility that they once did. Um, and when you're relying on these reviews, it's hard to control the narrative. Plus, these review platforms weren't built for apartments. A lot of the sort of review sites that people are using to leave reviews on apartments, like Yelp or Google, have sort of a one-time experience focus. It's great for a restaurant, a retail experience, something where you kind of go in, you have this one-time experience, and you leave a review about it, but it doesn't reflect the reality of living in an apartment community, which is this complex, ongoing relationship over years. And so it's really hard to capture that, sort of using these traditional star ratings. It's a one point in time focus. Normally, the reviews are written during a very high emotion period, too. This is when somebody either is first moving in, they're having a great experience, they're moving out, they're leaving on a note that's not as positive. They're not leaving reviews, multiple reviews over time to sort of reflect the ups and downs and sort of overall picture of living in this community. They're leaving it at a very high emotion time, which can really skew, and I think lead to some of that skepticism that folks have in trusting these reviews to get an accurate picture of what living in the community is like. Plus, there's tons of missing context. When someone's leaving a review, there's often no indication of the unit type, the floor, the lease length, their lifestyle. We don't know if this person was a mom. We don't know if they're a pet owner. We don't know, what type of unit they lived in. We're missing a lot of details here that really tell us about their overall experience living in this community. So, all in all, we can't escape these things, but we also know that review platforms aren't the best place to tell the story of what it's like to live in an apartment community. And we know there's a huge opportunity cost in June. Let's sort of not taking advantage of these narratives and really taking control of the narrative and highlighting these stories. This month in particular, we're looking at higher rent premiums across the board. A lot of communities are looking at rents that are between $150 and $300 above off-season rates. So missing out on these high premiums can really kind of impact the rest of your year. We also see a shorter conversion window. So this month, prospects are deciding on a new apartment in a couple of days often because of the competitiveness and sort of the inventory versus maybe 2 to 3 weeks in winter or the off season. And overall, we're seeing more competition. Often there's, 8 to 12 similar properties who are actively marketing, corresponding, going after these prospects at the same time. So standing out, kind of taking control of your narrative and really giving people an accurate picture of what it's like to live there is more important this month than ever. And the communities and sort of clients that we see who are really successful this month are the ones who have laid the groundwork to tell these stories, kind of bring resident stories to the front of their marketing, and then are able to really capitalize on this window and ultimately, see a huge impact on their bottom line. So that brings us to story-driven sales. I want to talk a little bit about the psychology, of why story-driven sales are so important here, and why these stories are going to beat stars, especially during peak season. So we know that actually leading with stories, and kind of having a narrative approach to our sort of marketing and our outreach here has a huge neurological impact. These stories are activating multiple brain regions. It's taking us longer to process and sort of absorb, which is good, because then that leads to an emotional response. We've kind of taken some time to process, more areas of our brain are activated. And often we're having an emotional response. We're feeling some amount of connection here to the story. Something is resonating with our own experience that we've gone through. And that's incredibly important when we're looking to make sort of a lasting impact and help somebody make this decision. That emotional connection, creating that bond during this process is super important. That's what creates some lasting memory and actually cuts through the decision paralysis that people are probably experiencing during this time as they're looking at hundreds of star reviews, They're probably touring multiple properties. And so really cutting through that, helping give them some clear, areas and sort of ideas to make this decision on is super important. And emotional connection does a much better job of that than just sort of relying on some cookie cutter, marketing and relying on the star reviews here to tell the story for us. And again, bringing in those stories actually creates some specificity and activates, those parts of our brain that are going to create memories here. So, leading with specific summer details about pool schedules, maybe maintenance, parking availability, and sort of addressing these seasonal concerns head on is going to build trust. Now, all of a sudden, there's some really specific data points that folks can use here. They remember some of the resident stories that they heard, and we have a much better shot at actually closing those leases. And so, kind of not being in control of the narrative and letting star reviews lead for us, is just a much more challenging way to win these leases. And so we really believe, here at RentGrata that letting the residents do as much of the selling as possible, for you, is going to help you highlight those stories, create all of those pathways that are going to lead to memories and ultimately help you win these leases with the right types of consumers. So really, letting those resident stories shine is super, super important here. Helps you better control the narrative, kind of represent the way that this apartment community actually is and sort of the experience of living here versus relying on these highly emotional sort of one point in time looks that we get from Google reviews. So that's really what RentGrata is sort of built to help you do, is really connect, those prospects with the residents who can tell this story for you in a really powerful way, provide some specific details that you may not be able to provide yourself to prospective renters. And so creating this connection where the sort of current residents can tell these stories directly to prospective renters is how we help a lot of our clients highlight these stories. Then creating some rewards there, when these conversations happen, they've shared these stories, they've created these bonds, really rewarding both parties there. And not only that, but sort of giving you some insights into the content of these conversations so that you can make better decisions. You can figure out what folks are actually talking about, what are some of the themes in these stories that residents are sharing, and how can you bring that in, either sort of find a way to address some of the concerns that they might have, or really highlight the things that they love and have really found to be amazing about living in that community. Now you're sitting on this gold mine of data around what the experience is like living here that helps you weave these stories into every sort of stage of the prospect funnel and build that trust, which is really what we're trying to do with leading with these stories. Is how can we build trust, sort of get over the skepticism, that I think a lot of folks have from the star reviews, just sort of like knowing that a lot of the marketing is coming directly from the community. Giving them that direct path to a resident is a really powerful way to build that trust. And so using this as a social proof engine, at every stage they can ask real questions, to real folks who are living in the community. And we see a huge impact, on the bottom line for our clients there. But whether or not you're using RentGrata, there are some really powerful ways this month and beyond that you can start to think about weaving stories kind of into your leasing process. So that's where we wanted to spend the bulk of today, and really chat through some super actionable strategies that you can use to better highlight these stories. Because you're like, okay, I want to sort of get over some of the star review. I want to take control of the narrative. I want to bring these stories into the process. But beyond just sort of traditional marketing, how can I do that in a really practical way to put these stories front and center from very early on when somebody is first encountering my community, all the way through the tour, and ultimately when they're signing a lease and moving in. So it's kind of starts pre-tour, before they ever come to the community, in these early stages of outreach, bringing these stories in through things like, actually before a tour, can we connect someone, to a current resident? Maybe get them together on a call, or even a Zoom, if we have residents who are open to doing that. And say, let's connect you with someone who lives here. She moved in last June, and can tell you about, specifically summer utility bills, or what some of the amenities look like in the summer, or great things to do in the neighborhood. And that, even before they come in for a tour, can start to build some of that trust, start to build a little bit of that emotional connection, and just be a really powerful way for you to start kind of showcasing some of these stories. Again, can we do some day in the life video tours? This is another great way, before someone has even, reached out about a tour. Can we create some resident narrated virtual tours showing actual summer day routines? So, folks who are using the fitness facilities in the summer, maybe a tour of the pool area if you have one at your communities. Again, kind of talking about great things to do in the neighborhood in the summer. If you have co-working spaces or sort of other shared spaces that folks are using in the summer, this is a great way, kind of having these video tours actually led by residents. Again, builds that trust right away. We're kind of showing these stories, really coaching the residents too to sort of make it a story, give them a day in the life, and a really accurate look at what it's like to live in the community kind of during this peak season during summer, can be a great way to stand out here. So a couple of, before they ever show up on site for a tour, ways we can start bringing these stories in. Again, through our digital presence, this is another great way, to start highlighting these stories. So, beyond some traditional marketing, that we do here, can we do sort of like a Real Talk Tuesday on social? Where we're actually having residents answer unfiltered questions, so rather than having it, be super planned and maybe just answering kind of common questions, can we give them some unfiltered ones, from prospects maybe that you've gotten or some common questions that way? Um, that's a great way, again, to really bring these stories in. So, having somebody actually discuss what it's like living here with toddlers during summer break, and turn that into some video snippets that you can promote on social, is a really awesome way to bring these stories in. Again, kind of looking at the email sequences and some of the follow-up that we're using today when somebody's starting to reach out about a tour, or engage with us, and replacing some of the generic follow-up emails, just traditionally sort of pushing them to tour or asking if they have any questions. Let's actually put some of those narratives and resident stories right there kind of early on. Here's what somebody wished they knew about summer parking. Here's some tips for keeping those utility bills low. Here's the journey of somebody who moved in last summer and sort of some of the amazing things that they found about living in the community, headed into fall. The more we can lead with that sort of in these early stages of interaction with prospects, the more we can build that trust, create all of those pathways that are going to really help our community stand out. When they're on the tour, there's some interesting ways too that we can actually bring these stories in. We're just a huge proponent of connecting prospects to residents as early as you can. Kind of the peer referral carries so much weight for people. We know that that's one of the biggest decision-making factors here is if they can have a peer referral, whether it's from a friend or from somebody just living here, that carries a ton of weight for prospects. So, actually having some of those friendly faces, folks who you're already kind of using as ambassadors or might be a friendly face around the community, really saying, you'd be surprised by how open a lot of those folks are to say, like, absolutely, if I'm out or I'm, home, I'm more than happy to come out and chat with a prospect and answer some of their questions, knowing that, that would have been really valuable to me when I was going through this process. And, being able to share that is, a really great thing. So you'd be surprised by how many folks are actually down to do this. And so actually on the tour itself, kind of connecting prospects and residents in an organic way, saying, hey, if you want to spend a little time at the end and sort of ask some questions to one of our residents, I'd love for you to be able to do that. So really kind of selecting those people, and creating that connection is a really powerful way on the tour, again, to put those stories front and center. Another thing that we've seen clients have success with is actually using some story cards. So as you are bringing people around the community on these tours, kind of have some resident quotes, have some of those stories featured right at some of the key amenities. Kind of as you're walking them by the gym, can you highlight some of the positive things that residents are saying about the gym? Really make sure you kind of highlight some of the community aspects here, and kind of show those stories of how folks are using the amenities, the things they love about them, through things like laminated story cards or, kind of printouts. We've seen some folks be really successful with that too. Again, sort of bringing in that social proof actually on the tour, and having some of these stories come from the residents versus, sort of just the property manager who might be leading that tour. Again, when we're actually closing the lease, even a little further in the process, they've toured, they're trying to make their decision here, maybe they're looking at a bunch of different communities. Can we do some of those future neighbor introductions? That's a great place as well to sort of say, hey, if you have any lingering questions, if there's anything you're not sure about, I'd love to connect you with somebody who lives in the community who can actually answer some of those questions for you. I remember you said you like to run. Let me connect you with somebody in the building who actually moved here because the park is nearby and they love, being able to run in the park. And they can answer some of your questions you might have about the safety of running in the neighborhood or things like that. So that's another great place, kind of towards the end to create that connection and actually help them start to build, some friendships and connections at that community. That can be a really powerful way when somebody's trying to envision themselves, living in that community, connecting them with like-minded folks who share their interests or have a similar background, maybe another person who works from home and can share a little bit of their experience, sort of what it's like to work from home in the building, is a great way to kind of seal the deal and really create that emotional connection that'll help them make the decision. And again, sharing stories from residents who moved in during that time last year. Now they have a year under their belt. They can kind of talk about what it was like to move in at that time, some of the things that they learned maybe moving in at that time. Really highlighting those stories as some of your follow-up, kind of post-tour and towards the end of the process is just another great way to put these stories, in front of people at a time when it's going to be the make or break between, their decision to lease here. So I wanted to leave you to, with a really specific, some specific action items for June, and ways that you can start to, get started on this right now, headed into July here to capitalize on peak season, and just say, in the next week or so, what are a couple things that you can actually get started on here, to bring these stories in. So the first I would say is think about your summer ambassador recruitment. Thinking about the residents who love some of the summer amenities, the folks who are using the pool every day, maybe they're out there reading all the time, or they're in the fitness center every morning. These are folks who will become great ambassadors. So think about specifically for some of those summer amenities, is there anybody you have in mind who could be a great ambassador there? Often focusing on families who are home a little bit more in the summer because the kids are out of school is a great way to start identifying some folks who might be around the community a little bit more and sort of willing to provide some of those stories. And use your engagement data. So, the folks who are coming to community events, the residents who are already kind of responding to emails and outreach regularly, or you've had great interactions with, that's sort of a great starting place to start looking for who some of these ambassadors could be, and then sort of, pitching them some of these opportunities. Again, thinking about your peak conversation topics. What are some of the big questions that you're getting this time of year? Actually documenting some of those things. Making sure you're really kind of creating a catalog of, here are the big things that we get asked in June. Here are the things we really want to highlight. A lot of the sort of content of tours, where you're focused during this time of the year. Things like pool and outdoor amenity discussions, actually like summer utility management, highlighting any summer community events that you might have, sort of pulling those peak conversation topics out, can help you to start to get a sense for where to build some of these narratives and stories that will really resonate with folks during this time of year, and help you lean into that peak season. And again, that story amplification, looking at how to bring it in, not just sort of, in your marketing, but at every stage of the leasing process. So thinking about sort of your leasing process today's, the ways that you're interacting with prospects, and how you can really bring those stories in at every stage. So turning some of those June topics that you identified, those sort of peak conversation areas into that social media content. Maybe creating some summer at, your community highlight reels, give people a really sort of accurate, sort of up-to-date look at what it's like this month to live there, and building some of those FAQs around some of those peak conversation topics can help give your teams that ammunition and those stories that they need to weave throughout the process and really highlight these things. And again, this is the month to really activate your referral program. With higher rent premiums, with something like 40% more people touring this month, this is the time to really lean into those referrals and when you need to sort of like lead with that trust more than ever. So really activating your referral program, consider increasing those referral bonuses, actually hosting some of those summer-themed resident appreciation events, and making sure that you're recognizing, the residents who are willing to kind of share these stories and get involved, making sure that you're really recognizing them. They'll feel great about that and be excited to continue doing this. And often get involved and sort of feel this investment in their community. You'd be surprised, how much folks want to be a part of this and care about their community. And so are happy to help out on some of these things and share their stories to make sure that the future of their community, is one that they're proud of as well. So, if I can leave you with sort of a big key takeaway here, it's that we want to make these stories feel as natural and helpful, rather than salesy as possible, while systematically capturing and deploying them during this super busy period. So, the way that we overcome, some of those star reviews and the generic reviews, that we're dealing with is by leading with authenticity, leading with honesty, and really building that emotional connection, which is the best way here to bring these stories front and center and help you actually close more leases because of it. All right. So thank you guys for joining. I know we have a couple minutes if there are any big questions here. I'd be happy to answer them. If not, I'm also going to follow up. We have some additional information I can share here. I'll make sure to send you all the recording too, so you can actually go through and start implementing some of these strategies. And definitely feel free to reach out if you have questions about this, about kind of managing star reviews, reputation. Happy to provide, some of the marketing strategies that we've seen our clients use that are really successful here. So thank you guys. If there are no questions, I will see you for the next one. Thanks all.